All right, in this episode, we're going to be making an image gallery using CSS Grid, and it's actually pretty nifty because as wide as the image gallery gets, you'll see that these items sort of just fit into each other, and that's using our Grid Auto Flow Dents that we have. And then when you click on one of them, it pops up a little overlay here, and we'll show you the actual full image. So just some of them are tiny little slivers. You can click them and see the full version. So let me talk about the idea behind this image gallery. The idea is that, as we know with CSS Grid, is not everything fits into each other perfectly. You just can't throw a whole bunch of random size things and expect them all to fit in perfectly. Let me open up the inspect element here and turn on our layout for grid. This is our gallery here. So what the idea behind this is that I'm making all of these possible sizes. I'm making them all based on a 100 pixel grid. So our grid is always going to be 100 pixels by 100 pixels. And then each of these images is just going to span a random amount between 1 wide and 4 wide and 1 high and 4 wide. You can see sometimes they're tiny 1 by 1. Sometimes they're going to be huge by going 4 by 4, and that's going to be totally random. But my idea is that by having a lot of these extra little 1 by 1s, like right here, it's going to hopefully fill all of the gaps. You can see it's not perfect in this case. There is one missing because maybe there wasn't enough. But if I were to refresh this, you see that it's actually starting to look pretty good at the end. Maybe we'll add a couple extra 1 by 1. So I like to think of these little ones as sort of filler, and they will sort of fill up. So we'll add a little bit more to fix those up. So this is going to require a little bit of JavaScript. Options here, if you don't feel like writing JavaScript, you can just go into the finished version and just copy paste all of the JavaScript. And that will get you up and running. But I don't know, it's fun. I think a lot of you will like to sort of code along with it. So feel free to give this one a shot. This one's a little bit more advanced. So don't feel like you have to do this one all by yourself. So you can sort of code along with me. Good. All right, let's kick it off, just understanding what we're sort of starting with here in our starter files. First, we have an overlay. And that's going to be this, when you click on one of them, that's going to be this gray or black overlay. And then inside of that, we have an overlay inner, which has just two things, just a button to close it and an image, a tag that is actually going to be showing the image. This isn't the most bulletproof image gallery ever made, but it should give you a sort of a good head start to making your own. Then we also have our gallery, which is going to be our grid. That's this thing right here. And there's nothing in it because I don't want to manually code all of these sizes by hand. So we're actually going to generate them with JavaScript. Similarly, in the image folder, I've just got a bunch of 500 by 500 pixel images. They're all going to be 500 pixels wide. And then we're going to be using a feature of CSS called object fit in order to make them fit perfectly, sort of like background size cover if you've ever used that. Let's keep going in the starter files. What else do we got? Some base CSS here. I haven't imported that other base CSS in here. This is just some stuff that we have. I have styled the close button and the actual overlay itself. We'll go back into what that is, but the sort of the heavy lifting, which is the grid right here. I haven't done any of that with you, as well as the sort of the centering and the little animation that we have going on here. So let's get it going. The first thing we want to do is actually generate some gallery images. So let's go down to the script tag here and start writing some code. We want to first select the gallery itself. So we'll get the gallery, and then we'll also need the overlay. And these things are going to be very similar. So I'll just say const gallery equals document.query selector. And we're going to select something with a class of gallery and a class of overlay. And then inside the overlay, we also need the image itself so that we can update it when you click it, and the close button, which is that. So we'll say const overlay image is equal to overlay.query selector. We'll look inside of that for the image tag. And then we'll also look inside of it for the button. Actually, we'll call this close. And that has a class of close on it. Good. Now, what we need is a sort of a little function here that's going to generate some HTML for us based on passed in widths and heights. So again, the idea behind this is that it's going to between 1 and 4 width or horizontal and 1 and 4 height or vertical, I'm going to be calling it. And then in our CSS, we're going to just assign, here, let me show you here what it's actually looking like. Whoa, Firefox screenshots. Whoa, this is not what I wanted. Okay, hold on. Right click, inspect element. And if we open our gallery up, you'll see actually what's being generated is that they all have a H, like 1, H4, H2, and each of those H1, H4, H2s correspond with a different span value. So this one has a H2, which means that it's going to horizontally span 2 on the column. And then it has a V3, which means it's going to vertically span the row 3. You get the point, right? So here we'll make a function called generate HTML. And that's going to take in a horizontal and a vertical. I've used destructuring there if you're not sure what that little thing was. And then from that, we're going to return just some backticks that we have here. And that will give us let's give ourselves a div. And that div will have a class of item. And then the H value that gets passed in. Oh, that's not pound. It's a $sign. And the V with the V sign that we've passed in. Good. And then inside of that, we need an image tag with the source is going to be images / it's going to, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Let's just use 1.jpg for now. And then we will also give an overlay item to this. And that's this little yellow spot that sort of comes up from the bottom when you hover over top of it. So that is going to be a div with the class of item __ overlay. I'm just using some BEM here. And then inside of that, we'll have a button that will say view. And that button is going to trigger the actual opening of the value that we have. Good. So we have this generate HTML function here. Next up, I want to make a quick little helper function that's going to give us a random number between 1 and something. So we'll say function random number. And I'm going to pass in sort of like an upper limit. And from that, we're going to return math.floor, math.random times the limit plus 1. And then what we can do up here is swap out this 1 with the actual function that we just made, which is a random number. I have 12 images, so it's going to give us between 1 and 12 .jpg. Cool. And all right, let's go ahead and start making a bunch of images. So I want to let's start with 50 images and we can pop them on the actual screen. So what I like to do is I need like an array of a bunch of arrays, meaning that I want to just get a bunch of things that are like, maybe the first one is 1 wide and 4 high. And then maybe the next one is 2 wide and 2 high. And maybe the next one is 3 or 4 wide and 1 high, right? I basically just want a bunch of random arrays where the first thing is going to be how many columns it spans. And the second thing is how many rows it's going to span. So the way that I figured we could do that is we'll just make a digits variable here, and we'll just make a empty array. And the way that you can make an empty array with the 50 blank spots is just using array.from, and you pass it an object that just has a length property on it. It's a pretty neat little trick. Whoops. Array.from also takes a map function, which will allow us to populate what goes into each one of those. So what will go into each one is a random number between 1 and 4, and then another random number between 1 and 4. So let's just console.log the digits and see what we're dealing with. Go to our console tab here. Good. So when we load the page, we are getting an array of arrays, and we get 50 items, and each one has 2, 2, 3, 4, 4, 1, 4, 2. You get the point, right? And this is great because this is just a bunch of random things that we're then going to pass into this generate HTML. So what we need to do now is make an HTML a variable. So we'll say const HTML is equal to, we'll take that digits array and we'll map over each one. And we'll simply just pass it to this generate HTML. So see how what's going to happen is for each of these, it's going to pass in the array 1, 3, and those are immediately going to be destructured into the horizontal and the vertical values, and they're going to be put into here. So digits.map generate HTML, we'll join it on the end just so that it will convert it to a string. And let's just console.log that HTML, see what we're dealing with. Woohoo! Look at this. So we got a div with a class of item, and then every single one, watch as I refresh the page, they're always going to be different. H4, H2, H1, H4, H4, H4. Seems like it's H4 a lot. H1. You get the point, right? We're just generating a whole bunch of HTML. And now what we can do is we can take our gallery, which is this value that we've selected up here, and we can just set the inner HTML to be that HTML that we have. And there we go. Watch this. When the page loads, we're going to get a whole bunch of random images popping up. See, every time it loads, it's just going to be different random images, and they all are going to have different classes. Good. So that's enough JavaScript for now. Let's get into the actual CSS of it. So let's go into our gallery, and we'll display grid on the actual grid. And again, we need to make it 100 pixels wide for each one. Oh, somebody at my door. Who's there? Oh, no, it was just motion. Excuse me. What were we doing? Oh, yeah, we're making a grid of 100 pixels. So grid, template, columns. We did this 100 times. And how many do we need? Well, we don't know. As many as it is wide. So we can just repeat autofill. Remember, we learned about that. 100 pixels each one. Good. Give that a save. And ooh, look at what we're working with so far. If we inspect element, let's turn on our layout tools for the gallery. You can see that there's 9, but if it goes bigger, 10, 11, 12, each one is being slotted into a grid. So that's our columns, our horizontal that we're working with. But we also need the vertical. Now, the thing about the vertical is we don't know how many there are going to be vertical. So instead of explicitly telling it what the rows will be, we'll just size the automatic rows that get created. We'll size the implicit or the auto rows. So say grid auto rows, and that is going to be 100 pixels high. All right, so now it looks like we're getting somewhere with this actual grid. As they get bigger and bigger, each one seems to be taking up, but now they're also kind of spilling out. So let's work on actually sizing them first. So we'll take our base item, and we actually don't need to tell it to by default span 1 by 1 because that's the default of it. But we'll say any item that has a V2 on it, meaning that it is spanning vertical 2, we grid row span 2. And now you'll see, let's go and find one. Or this one right here, the second one, that was a spanning 2. If I hover over top of it, you'll see that it is now taking up 2 vertical spots. You can't see the image taking up 2 spots. That's because the images are still spilling out of each of them. Maybe if we did something like this, item, overflow, hidden, maybe that will work a little bit better. There we go. Okay, so you see that these ones right here are being too high. And let's just keep going doing the rest. So anything that has a V3 is going to be that. And anything that has 4 is going to span 4. Beautiful. Now let's do that with the horizontal versions as well. So let's see here. Can we do a little bit of keyboard shortcuts? Duplicate it all. Select that. H. Woo! Did that work? So this one has horizontal 2. Oh no, obviously it's not going to work because it's grid row, not grid column. So we'll say grid column. Aha! Now we're getting somewhere. So we've got all of our items. They are all being sized appropriately. The only problem is that we have all these empty spaces, and that's because by default, whenever it runs into a spot that it cannot fit, and let's run through how this works. That one fits, that one fits, that one fits, that one fits, but then the next one, which is needs to be 4 horizontal and 2 high, it doesn't fit right here because we only have 3 wide and 1 high. So it just keeps going on until it finds a spot, and that's here. And then that space is forever going to be unused because the browser does not go back to fill it. So we know how we can fix that. We'll go back up to our grid here, gallery, and we'll say grid auto flow, and we'll call it dense. And then it will start to fill it in as we have these little 1x1ers. It'll start to go back and fill in the values as we want. So that's looking pretty good. But let's take a look. We start to now have a bunch of little spots because there just isn't enough of these little filler 1x1s that can fit itself in. So the first time I did that, I was like, oh, that's kind of a bummer. I don't know, maybe you could design something cool that would fit in there. But if this was like a WordPress blog where you were having a bunch of blog posts, what I would do, and that's what we're going to do here, is we're going to load it up with a bunch of extra 1x1s so that they'll all fill themselves in. So let's go back to where we generated all this HTML in our JavaScript. And that was right here. We're just going to concat an array, and inside of that array, we're just going to concat a bunch of new arrays that are just 1x1s. So take that and all right, that looks good to me. That should be enough. And let's see it load. I think I broke it. Let's open up our dev tools here. Array.contact. What am I doing? Concat. There we go. Whoa, looking good. Do we have any holes? Let's see. Looking good. There's almost too many extras here. Maybe I'll refresh it a couple times. Yeah, you know what? That's too many extra 1x1s. So in my case, you could probably also write some sort of algorithm that would detect empty holes and fill them as we need it. Oh, there's a couple extra there at the bottom. Couple here. Maybe I deleted too many. I don't know. You get the point. You can sort of play with it and see exactly there. That's looking good to me. Awesome. So that's the first part of it. But now we need to write some more CSS to actually get them clickable and have this sort of overlay pop up. So if you're happy with this, you can stop this video now and move on to the next one. But if you'd rather learn a little bit more CSS and JavaScript, then let's keep on trucking. All right, let's first start, if we look at the answer here, let's start with these like little overlays. And also these images are much better cropped than they are here. You see here, they're just taking the top right-hand corner of the image and the rest is spilling out. So we're actually going to make each of these individual items a grid as well. So scroll to your item selector and we are going to display grid on it. And we're just going to make it a 1x1 grid. So I'll explain this in a second. So grid template column 1 and grid template rows 1. And what that should do, if I now go to the layout tab and take one of the first ones and inspect it, it's just a 1x1 grid. And the reason why I do that is because CSS grid is also really good for overlapping elements. Instead of us using position absolute in order to overlap our items on top of here, because this like yellow little item details, that's needs to be overlapped on top of the image. So if that was the case, then I'd either have to make the details or the image or both of them position absolute. And I don't want to have to do that. I'm going to show you how to do it exactly with just using CSS grid. So we'll take our item, let's do the image first. And we're going to say grid column 1, -1, so span across the entire thing, and the row also span across the entire thing. And then we're going to give the image a width of 100%, a height of 100%. And now this starts to, oh, this is the wrong one. That's the answer. Here we go. This is what we're working with. You see that these images are now being stretched. So what we can do to that is give ourselves an object fit and call it cover. And that will just, it's sort of like background size cover, where it will trim the left or the top or the bottom or the left and the right to make sure that it fits perfectly inside of it while still showing as much of the image as we can. We also have contain in there as well, but that's not what we're looking for, because that would show the entire image. So background size cover does work with the ability to do spanning across 1-to-1, but you do also need this 100% in order for that to work properly. Good. Then the details, the item overlay, let's grab that. So the item overlay, and I'm just going to say background red. And you see that the item overlay is sort of below the actual item, and we want it to overlap on top of this image. So we're just going to take this grid column and grid row details and put it on the item overlay as well. And this is something we have not done in our previous one, and that is the ability to overlap items on top of each other. If you place them on the same row and column, they will just overlap each other, and then Z index comes into play. And if I wanted this to, I think I could do position rel Z index 2, and that would put the image on top. But because of source order in HTML, the overlay is just fine. So the background red here. Oh, got to get rid of this position relative. That's why that didn't go away. So we don't actually want background red. I want my yellow, specific yellow, which is that. And I'm going to put 32, which is 70% opaque. This is RRGGBBAA. And that 32 is hex for 70% transparent. Good. I'm happy with that. Let's do position relative on this. And let's add a little bit of padding, 10px. Good. Now I want to totally center this button in the middle. So how can I center something in the middle? Actually, we don't need this padding because we're going to center it. So let's do display grid on the actual item there. And you see by default, what is the align items and justify item? It's stretch. So the entire thing, this actually looks kind of cool. The entire thing is a button now, which is crazy, but we want it to just go in the middle. So we say justify items, and that is the x-axis on the row, and we'll say center, and that will put the button in the middle of each of them. And align items, that is along the y-axis. That will center it perfectly for us. Good. Let's also just say item overlay button. I realize I'm mixing my BEM and my just nested selectors, so forgive me. Let's say background none, border 2 pixels, solid white, color white, text transform, uppercase, background. Let's do little RGBA values here. Looking pretty good. Maybe a little padding on that. 5 pixels. Cool. So we have that. Now I also want to slide it down. And the way that we can slide something totally outside of the item is by using transform. So we'll go back up to our overlay here. We'll say transform, translate Y 100%. Actually, just do 50% just so you can see what's actually happening here. 50% will bring it down, obviously, halfway. So 100% will bring it just off the actual item. And then what we can do is we'll say when the item is hovered, then the item overlay is going to be a transform of translate Y 0. We'll bring it back to where we are. So now when I hover over top of it, they automatically show up. And if I would like, I can go up to my overlay and put a transition 0.5 seconds or something like that. And that will animate it up. That's too slow. 0.2 seconds. Woo! All right, we're in business now. I think that's all the CSS we have for overlapping and overlaying things on it. Now let's go down to the script tags and write a little bit of JavaScript so that when somebody clicks one of these items, we can then show the overlay. So I'm going to go down here, and the reason why I'm going to select these elements after they've been created is because otherwise I have to get into event delegation, and I've got videos on that in my JavaScript 30, but I'm not going to do it here. So I'll say const items is equal to document.query selector all.item. Then we'll take each of the items and we'll loop over it, and we'll say for each item, item.add event listener. We're going to listen for a click, and then when that happens, we're going to handle the click. So we need to make a function called handle click. Let's do that up here. Function handle click takes in the event, and let's just console log the event dot current target. So open up DevTools here, go to our console, and now when you click on an item, we'll see that specific item that we have. Now inside of that we need a couple things. First, we need the actual source of the image. So if we click on the item, we want the image 1.jpg. So in here, we'll say const src is equal to e.currentTarget.query selector. We'll look inside of that for the image tag, and then we'll grab the source attribute right off of that image tag. So we have the image, we look for the image, we have the item, we look for the image tag, and then we grab the source attribute right off of that. And I could console log the source now on top of that. So let's see. Beautiful. I'm getting all of my JPEGs. Now we can take our overlay image and set the source of that to be the source that we just pulled. And what is the overlay image? That is, we scroll to the top here, that is this empty image that currently does not have a source, but will also be showing it. Good. I'm happy with that. Now the last thing we want to do is have the ability to open the entire overlay. And you'll see that if the overlay has a class of open, it is display gridded. Otherwise, it is display nulled. That's what I've done here. So we will make another function called open. And in that function, I'll just say overlay.classlist.add open. And we'll make a function called close, which will do the opposite of this. Good. Then inside of this handle click, we'll just simply say open. Actually, we don't need an entire open function for this. Let's just put this in here. Good. Then when I click it, whoa, looking good-ish. So that did pop it up for us. Seems like that image is a little bit big. The close button doesn't work. So let's wire up that close button first, and we'll figure out what's going on with the CSS here. So we'll say overlay close dot add event listener click, and when someone clicks it, we're going to run the close function. So open it up, click the close. Nope, not working. Any errors? Go to our console. Classlist.close. What am I doing? Do I even know? Remove. You're probably screaming at me. There we go. Open it up. The close works just beautifully. You could also hook that function up to run when somebody hits the escape key. We've done that a couple times in my JavaScript 30. So view that. Good. And let's just take a quick look at what's going on with this overlay. Overlay inner. Let's take a look at my CSS. Oh, it's because I had a figure. I'm going to change this to overlay inner instead. Beautiful. One other thing is it's actually not centered here. So what we can do is go back to our overlay and go say when it is open, we're going to display grid. And then we're just going to say align items center and justify items center. You see how we do that quite a bit? Open it up. Woo, look at that. Beautiful. I can't see the close button anymore, so we'll go up to our .close selector, and the color should be black. Beautiful. Looking good to me. I'm a big fan of that. Cool. So that is our very simple CSS grid image gallery using object fit dense. Hopefully you learned a few things, especially like the overlapping part. I use that a lot with CSS grid to overlap items on top of it. Good job. I'll see you in the next one.